Hi, welcome back, or welcome to my channel if you're new. My name is Laura. Hi, hello, welcome. I'm doing the No Pan Left Behind challenge, and I figure in efforts to keep me accountable to actually trying to touch all of my eyeshadow pans in my collection, I will film these monthly updates, check in how I'm doing. I want to touch every single pan of eyeshadow in my collection, and I tried my hardest last year to do it. I really did. I really tried so hard, but I didn't end up touching every single pan of eyeshadow in my collection. I've let go of a lot of palettes that held me back. The thought of having to use them just kind of exhausted me. I am really excited about this video. I'm excited to touch every single thing in my collection. I'm really trying. 2023 is the year of trying to touch every single thing that I have, and I'm very happy about it. So I have a bullet journal, essentially. It's essentially an electronic bullet journal. So I have every single palette I colored in, and then I have another color for February. So my goal is that eventually my big broad board, say that 5 times fast, the board that has every single pan and if I've touched them or not, then I'll have one independently for January's, one independently for February's light pink. I'm excited to reflect on maybe shades that I use, I gravitate towards throughout for the whole year. Maybe there's seasonal shades. I would love to understand my trends in my own collection. That way I can better focus. Ooh, my husband's calling me, but I can better focus my efforts in those. I've split how I've categorized my palettes by how many pans of eyeshadow in the palette I use. So all the palettes we're going to talk about first are going to be palettes with 5 shades I used or less. So I figured I would start with the least amount of shades used, go up to the most amount of shades used in a palette. And it is going to be a little bit disproportioned eventually when ideally I've used everything in my collection, because there are some palettes in my collection that have 30 eyeshadows, and then my singles has 90 individual shades of eyeshadow in it. So as the year progresses, I'm sure that things will look a little bit more disproportioned, but I will make sure to have some information on the side of percent and how many pans of eyeshadow per palette I've used, that kind of thing. Picking it off with the palettes that I used 5 shades or less, and we're gonna start with palettes I've only used 1 shade in. And first, I will just mention this guy. This is my Adept Minka palette, and I only ended up using the shade Cora in a look. I ended up dipping into my Sugar Pill Fun Size palette for the mint blue, or the periwinkle blue purple in the palette, and it was so flippin' pretty, and I can't wait to dive into more of this palette. All right, and the last palette that we only used 1 shade is my Kaleidos Lunar Lavender palette. This was a gift from Haley. Thank you so much again, Haley. And I used the shade Dreamscape, which is this warmer toned purple. Super, super pretty. And again, I'm just excited to get more use out of this palette. Moving to palettes that I've used now 2 shades in, and we'll keep it on the trend of Kaleidos, because I did use my Kaleidos Astro Pink palette, and I used 2 shades in this guy, and not together, but also it's kind of cheating because one of the shades isn't actually from this palette originally. I ended up using these 2 shades, the matte berry tone, and then this beautiful, beautiful blue as I just dug my finger into it. Oh, it's so pretty. This is actually from the Electro Turquoise palette. It is the shade Tron. I used a couple other Adept palettes, 2 shades in both of these guys. Starting with the Adept Plain Jane Remastered palette, I ended up using ACI 10, this guy here, and ACI 12, this guy here. Really happy about that. Then also I ended up using 2 shades out of my Heather Austin and Adept palette. I was wearing this, I think, in my Trash It and Cash It video. I was wearing PA02 and Hey Y'all. In that look, I was wearing a burgundy sweater with that. It was really pretty. Really liked that. I also ended up using 2 shades from my Menagerie Feral palette, and this is going to be really depressing because I ended up dropping this after my Viva Magenta video. Then I used only a couple palettes. I used 4 palettes, 3 shades out of those. First one is this big behemoth of a palette. This is my Natasha Denona Purple Blue palette. Makes me very happy that I reached for this one. I have a couple Unearthly Cosmetic palettes I want to just talk about. They're another ones that I used 3 shades in. The first one is the All I Ever Wanted palette. This was in my Pan Those Eyeshadows. When I had my intro in December and my first update in January, it rolled out. But that is this guy, like, oh, such a pretty pan. And then same thing with the Unearthly Leather and Lace palette. I ended up reaching for these 3 bottom matte burgundy-esque shades in a look. Then the last palette I used 3 shades is my my Sugar Drizzle Pickle palette. The whole title of it is just like very long and comical, so I'm not going to say it. I ended up using the shades Pickle Juice, Dill Pickles, and Tickle My Pickle. So these 3 in the corner. And I only have 2 palettes that I used 5 shades in. And the first one, it comes from this extremely reflective palette here. This is the Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. And I don't remember the look that I did with this, if I'm being very honest, but I ended up using the shades here, Clove, Glory, Poppy, Morgan, and Laurel in A or multiple looks. Can't remember. So there is that. Oh, then probably my oldest palette in my collection at this point, my Tarte Tartist Pro palette. This is just the original. I busted up my packaging when I went to New Mexico in last year. But this is what my extremely reflective palette looks like. Hopefully that's a little bit better for you guys. I completely forgot to mention this. I do count this in my pan numbers because there is technically a bottom of the packaging I could hit. I did reach for this guy also. That was another random kind of eyeshadow. I have 3 individually potted shades. I reached for one of my 3. So next we have to talk about the palettes that I've used 6 or more shades in. And starting off, I'm going to talk about my Glamlight Ice Cream Dream palette. And I've used 6 shades in this palette. I have used these 2 shades up here, these 3 pinks here, as well as this one. Then I'm not going to open these up because they are going to have spoilers for my Pan Those eyeshadows. My 2 Kaleidos palettes that are in 2 project pans. This is in my Pan Those eyeshadows and my deck of panning, and then this is just Pan Those eyeshadows. So you've seen these before. You know what they look like. I am panning a couple shades out of the Sci-Fi Green palette and 1 out of the no. And then I also used 6 shades out of my Dragon Fruit by Cleona and Emily Violet Marie. Now, I'm a little peeved at this palette because it was a pretty expensive palette, and I've only really opened and shut the palette 10, maybe 15 times. And when I was filming my palette tour a couple days ago, the packaging broke. So now it's like very annoying. I didn't use any palette 7 times, but I ended up using this 8 shades inside of this guy. And maybe I shouldn't count these towards like the palettes, but I still count them because I had to reach into these somehow. And these are my Cleona Cosmetics singles. I am missing one. It's in a BYOP that I built for this month. Did not record it, just wanted to focus on some things. Then moving to my palettes that I've reached for 9 shades in, and I'll start with this is my Druid palette by Fantasy Cosmetica. Fantasy Cosmetica and Jordan were kind enough to send this my way, and I reached for all 9 shades that are in this palette, and I'm excited to share one that I've reached for 9 shades in relatively recently. Like, I put this in my rotation, my like palette, like my everyday makeup little basket, I guess, for like the last week of January, and I've reached for 9 shades in this guy already. So I ended up reaching for Rhino, Savannah, Aya, Lotus, Amara, Desert Day, Shea, Tribe, and Tamarind. Like tons of like variable shades in that one too. Lots of different tones, lots of different looks. Then only one palette I reached for 14 shades in, and that is a palette that only has 14 shades. This is my Too Faced Pinker Times Ahead. Oop, I just might have dug my finger into this. That is this palette here. I reached for every single shade in this palette. I love this palette already. It's a quick favorite of mine. I reached for 15 independent single eyeshadows that are held in my large storage palette. Oh my gosh. Huh. The missing shades I have in a BYOP for the current amount of time that I want them in, maybe a week, maybe 2. I'm not going to point to them all. It'll be very, very time consuming. But I reached for 15 of these suckers, 3 in this realm, and then a slew in my like purpley neutrals. So there's only 2 more palettes to talk about, and only one is under 20 pans in a palette. So we're going to talk about that first. And that's this guy here. This is one of those lawsuit palettes, so like beware. But this is the Morphe and Sour Patch Kids collection collab, and this is the Sour Then Sweet palette. And then the last palette we're going to talk about is one that I'm not going to open, unfortunately, and it's one that's in my deck of my year-long project pan. I'll have that in the cards, and I'm trying to project level up this one, so I'm trying to use all the shades once and hit 1 pan, so I don't want to show you any spoilers if there are any. So I ended up using 28 out of the 28. I guess that is a spoiler right there, but I ended up reaching for every single shade in this palette already, so I'm really excited that I've gotten so much use out of my larger collection, or my larger palettes too. Now, standouts. 2 by far standout palettes for the past month are definitely these 2 palettes here. The palette I've had in my collection for almost a year at this point. Again, this wasn't gifted from the brand. The Druid palette is absolutely stunning. I flippin' love this palette though. Very happy I have this in my collection. And then by far, this guy here, I have quickly fallen in love with this palette, and I am not someone that usually is that quick to the draw with it, but I definitely just like want this on my desk and want to keep reaching for it. It just, these like more ethereal kind of shades. Even this green is definitely more gold and neutral leaning on the eye. Definitely doesn't read as like green as I feel like it looks in the pan. It's definitely much more approachable on the actual eye. I want to get more use out of like my palettes as a whole and just try different things together. Like, I have a feeling these 2 would actually look so pretty together, and I'm really trying to touch everything. I just want to quickly go over some stats for my eyeshadow usage and consumption so far. We are not talking pan percent or pans hit in this video. That is something that I really truly want to save for my Pan Those Eyeshadows, where pan percentage comes into play a little bit more. This is more, I want to use all the things, not want to pan all the things in this kind of formatted video. But out of the 39 palettes in my collection, I did end up touching 22 of them. I think that was like 56%, something like pretty substantial. I definitely think I will have that much of my collection touched, but I don't think it will be different shades. I think I'll touch a lot of the same shades as well as like some additional shades. So where we'll talk in February on like how much of my percentage I used in February and then cumulatively for the year. For my 644 total pans of eyeshadow that I could hit pan in, I hope that makes sense. Anything with the bottom I count as like an independent pan of eyeshadow. So out of the 644 pans of eyeshadow that I could hit pan in, I have reached for 159 different shades or different pans in my collection. That is a lot of eyeshadows used in 1 month. 159 eyeshadows in 31 days. But that is humongous. That is about 25% of my collection that I've actually used in some capacity this year, and it's only January. That makes me so excited. I think maybe I will be lucky if I hit 10% of my collection more, so 35% by the next update. That's gonna be like my goal, is just increasing that number by 10% every update. So in theory, I will get there eventually if I can use some palettes like my Tartist Pro palette, where it has mostly matte shades, and pair it with some of those all shimmer shade palettes. I think I could get the usage and the amount of things touched in my collection that I want, but we are just gonna have to wait and see. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it to the very end, leave me the skillet with the eggs in it, the emoji with the pan. in the comments below. That way I know that you made it to the end of the video. Let me know any standout palettes and products that you had in your collection that you discovered this month. Is there a standout shade of eyeshadow that you use that you're like, yes, this is my January shade now, and that's what you're going to focus on for the foreseeable future? I would love to know. I would love to know what you guys are gravitating towards, or if you have any palettes that I showed that you're like, I have that and I haven't used it yet. Maybe we can inspire each other to use our products that way. But that is it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys are staying healthy, sane, and safe, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye! Typically, I partner palettes. I don't use things like independently, like ever. I always pair them with other things. So for the most part, all of these palettes were not like standalone usage. They were more often used in